Alright guys, John here, out in the shop again, and we're going to talk about carb adjustments. So this is a big one. I've had a lot of requests for this. I hope you guys can see what I'm doing here. Otherwise I'm going to have to film with the front facing camera. But there we go. So again, this saw, I'm going to do the first heat cycle and startup right in front of you guys so you can see that they will start up without bump starting them after you do port work and all that. So I do trim this cover back. You want to do your adjustments with your air filter on. If you're going to run a max flow, you want the filter oiled, all that stuff, and with the bar and chain on it, and after it gets warm. But I'm going to show you how I adjust it just for the initial heat cycle, because I've had questions about this, and then I'm going to bang two videos out, or two topics out in one video. So how do you like that? Get two birds stoned at one time, or whatever they say. And for the basics, I'm trying to explain this so you'd be able to do this on any saw. A lot of saws now are M-tronic and fuel injected and all that, but you're going to have two settings that are next to each other and one off by itself. The one that's off by itself is a mechanical idle that does not mess with fuel-air mixture. Technically, it does not mess with fuel-air mixture. It is just a screw that you turn in clockwise, and you are going to increase your idle out, or counterclockwise, it's going to drop your idle, and it's pushing on a linkage that is connected to your butterfly valve, so it opens it a little bit. The more air you give your saw, the more the RPMs are going to increase. I'm trying to dumb this down and so you guys can understand it if you know nothing about a saw or a carburetor or a fuel air mixture. So this basically increases idle to the right, to the left, decreases idle. These two settings do mess with your fuel air mixture. The best way to explain this is the one that is closest to your cylinder is going to be your low setting, and that will affect your fuel air mixture throughout the entire cycle of the RPM range. So people get that confused. They think the low just affects the idle and the low end. That's not true. If you give this a whole bunch of fuel or not enough fuel and lean it out, that affects your entire RPM range. The high setting is just going to affect the top end, a little bit after mid-range to top end, and that's why I like to add fuel to the low setting, if anything. Now I'm going to reset these just to show you that I run on heat cycles and startup after porting. I'm going to run this at, I see the S here on the screwdriver, that gives me an indication where I'm at. I'm going to run this at 1 1/4 turns out. So 1 1/4. The high, I'm going to run at the same thing. I'll turn this all the way in. I'm going to do 1 1/4, and this would be quite a bit for a saw, but this is heat cycles, first startup. I want to run it really rich, and I'll turn the idle in a little bit from where it was factory just so it's easier to start. Now startup is the same. I'm going to pull it a few times, and I'll probably have to turn the camera for that, so one sec. Okay, we've got the nitrous saw sitting down there. That thing sounds ridiculous. Now, the way I'm going to do this, for the first heat cycle, I'm just going to start it and let it idle, and I'll just show you how I adjust the initial. If I hear anything that needs to be adjusted right off the bat, I'm just going to adjust it out, and then I'll kill the video, because you got to let it idle for, you know, a good 2 minutes, maybe even 3 minutes. Let the piston swell up, and then I'll do my adjustments. So I'll cut video, and then I'll show you how I adjust after, and then we'll talk about, on a normal saw, lean drop off, how to set your idle, how to set your low and high. We'll talk about all that. So I chopped the end of my pinky off a couple days ago, so it hurts like hell to start saws, but I'll get by. So this has no decomp. I do have it on choke. I'm going to give it a couple pulls with the old saw between the legs deal, and I'm going to sally with my finger. And this is just kind of getting everything moving in the car, basically, getting any vacuum locks out of it. Now I'm going to pull it. I bet within 5 pulls she pops off, and then I'll start it like normal. Oh, that hurt. I should drop the screwdriver. Yeah, missing the end of my finger. It looks a little short, doesn't it? Scared to look. Well, that went pretty good. I blip the throttle a few times after it gets warm. Really give it the wood. The third heat cycle that I do, I piss rev that thing. And you guys might not agree with it, but I tell you what, I never glaze cylinders. I never have braking issues. This is the best way that I have found to do it. The first heat cycle, I don't really go nuts, but the second heat cycle, a little more. The third heat cycle, I hold that thing wide open for a good probably 6 seconds. Let it off, hold it wide open again for about another 3 seconds, let off, then blip it a few times, and then we're good to go. Don't ever start it right back up after. I see some guys, they shut it off and then they start it up to test idle. It'll idle, trust me. If you got your idle set right, it'll idle just fine. I like to shut it off and leave it. Now it's going to cool down, and once it's all the way cool, I'm going to do the second and third heat cycle. But there we go. That's how I do heat cycles. And next we'll talk about adjusting a carb. Okay. All right. So I got the saw warmed up. I'm going to reset the carb, and I'm going to set it at 1 1/8 on each. And that's going to be pretty close. And I'll crank the idle in. So I'm going to want to look for what they call lean drop off on the low end. If you're going to adjust your carb and you're having trouble with it, turn your idle, the mechanical idle in, the one by itself, turn it in a couple good 2-3 turns. Then the saw is going to stay running. If you don't have your idle in far enough, you're going to have problems adjusting because your saw is going to want to die. So lean drop off on the low end is going to be, you're going to turn the low side screw in to the right, which is leaning it out, shutting the fuel off, and you're going to turn it in until the saw basically starts to starve for fuel and dies out. They call that lean drop off. I give it a good half a turn, rich, to the left, counterclockwise, after you hit your lean drop off. Then adjust your idle from there. And then for the high end, this is a limited coil, but you're going to want to, the way I do it is I leave a bar and chain on it. Obviously have the saw warmed up, which it is, air filter on, all that good stuff. And I'll hold it wide open and turn it in until the saw just starts to scream. And then once I hit that point of it's just singing like a bird, back it off a little bit, like a good quarter turn, so it's 4-stroking a little bit, and I leave them like that. I do not run these lean saws. This lean is mean shit it's bullshit. A saw will hit 15,000 with a bar and chain on it, big deal, because in the cut it's going to fall on its face. They are faster, they're torquier, and it's better for the saw if you run them rich. If you do all this that I'm doing and your carb settings are like a quarter turn on the low and 3.5 on the high, something ridiculous, you got issues. There's something else going on. But as a general rule of thumb for a stihl, a stock one, you're going to be at about 1 and 1, and I run mine at 1 1/4 and 1 1/8. That's turns out. When you hear people say 1.5 and 1, they mean 1.5 on the low and 1 on the high. That's turns out from bottom, from all the way tight, basically. So I have this thing set pretty decent, and again, I have my idle cranked up. I'll show you what lean drop off is. This is a limited coil, so I won't be able to, hit the point of no return on the high end. I can turn that high screw in. It's just the saw will just die out. thing I should have talked about, if your saw is not returning to idle fast enough, that means you don't have enough fuel on the low end. So if you rev it up and you hit wide open throttle and then you let off the throttle and it takes 3 seconds for it to idle back down, or it won't idle back down, it's just taking forever, you need to add fuel to the low setting. Again, low, close to the cylinder, high, furthest away, idle is off by itself. The low and the high adjust fuel air mixture. The high, or the idle, basically is just a screw that pushes on the linkage for the butterfly valve. So it's just a mechanical idle is what I call it. So that's how I would tune this saw. Okay, I ended that video abruptly because I started going into more in-depth information and got off on a tangent. And the way my brain works is I'll say something and then I think, well, if I say that, I have to mention this too because it goes together. And it just got really crazy. I probably ended up talking about buying a horse from somebody, and I was just like, wait, this is ridiculous, as I'm starting to do now. But I do want to make a disclaimer. It is not as easy as we make it look. Anybody that has experience that's adjusted a bunch of carbs, that does this for a living, we make it look really easy. And trust me, it's not. If you've never done it or not experienced with it, it's a lot harder than it looks. And people that are trying to show people how to adjust a carb and teach people, you got to realize that too. That's why I'm dumbing this down a lot. We make it look really easy, and it's not. For one thing, I always turn the mechanical idle in. This is the LA, and this is a 660 carb, but let's just go over the settings. So it sits in the saw like this, and this would be the cylinder side, and this would be the air filter side, right? So again, sits like this, so closest to the cylinder. This would be your L, or your low, H, or high, LA, I call it a mechanical idle. See, they call it a mechanical idle because it pushes on this linkage. This is also what your throttle, your trigger is connected to, a linkage that pushes on this, and it is opening this butterfly valve. This is what I mean by butterfly valve. So that is going to open. It's always under spring tension, so it closes, right? When your saw is idling, this tension is let off, and it is resting on this taper on this screw. I really wish my camera light didn't go out. It always goes out when I do a video, but will it focus? Okay, so there's a taper on that screw in that bottom of this. See that, how it rests on there? So that is what's adjusting your idle. That's why when you turn it in, it's slightly opening this, and you turn it out, and it's letting it close. Now, you probably won't be able to see it with the camera light being off, but there's always this piece, this golden colored piece right here, that circle, is always going to have some sort of a little hole in it, and it allows some air to go through it, otherwise it would just kill the saw. This butterfly valve in the front is for your choke, and this is the opposite. So your choke, spring tension, is going to let it open. So when you put your selector switch into the start position, it's pushing a lever on this, and that's what's choking your saw. And then you let off and you're in the run position, and it's open. So they're opposite. This one, spring tension closes it. This one, spring tension opens it. But there we go. So these two adjust fuel air mixture. This one technically does, technically doesn't, because what it's doing is it's just slightly opening this rear butterfly valve. Okay, so this carb has, it's for 660, but it's the same setup. I don't know if I mentioned that, but this has these red limiter caps in it. And that's what I meant by on a stock saw, you can't do these adjustments because it only allows you like 3/4 of a turn. Sorry, I'm trying to watch what I'm doing. I'm behind the phone actually, if my voice sounds different. But I'm all the way shut as far as it'll let me go. And all the way open. So it's like a little over 3/4 of a turn, right? So that's what I was saying. You can't adjust these like I just did in the video unless you pull these caps. I have videos showing how to do that. And either leave them out, or what I like to do is grind the little tab off and put them back in. And these are basically, when you turn it in clockwise, there's I wonder if I have one handy. 1 second, I'm gonna grab one of these. It's probably way easier to explain this. Stay with me, stay with me. Okay, this is kind of a short one, but this will work. Okay, so what is gonna be under that red cap is an adjustment like this. So it's like a little needle, and when you screw it in, it is closing the circuit for the fuel on that particular setting. And when it's all the way in, it basically shuts it off. And then when you turn it to the left and you open it up, it's because it's threaded, it allows more fuel to go through. So what you're technically doing when you're turning these to the left or opening them up is you're opening a path for the fuel to go through. More fuel drops RPMs, less fuel raises RPMs. Because that's when they say, like, have you ever heard a mechanic say, you're not giving it the gas, you're giving it air? You technically are, because when you give it the gas, open the throttle, put the pedal down, open, or give it throttle, you're opening this valve and you're feeding the Venturi air, and that's what accelerates RPMs. Because when you're at top RPMs, it's wide open like this, peak RPMs, wide open throttle, and it's getting the most air it can get. And when you let off, it idles because it's shutting the air off. So that's what controls your RPMs. All it is a valve, basically, open and shut. And that's why the 500i, you look at it doesn't have a carb, it has a throttle body, and it's the cheapest looking thing you've ever seen. You're like, oh wow, that's literally it, this technical high-tech thing. But that's what these are doing. These both look similar to this guy right here. And another trick, if you ever take your carb apart to clean it and you don't know, the L is always longer. I don't know why. It's just the way that carbs are. I have never seen one where the L, these needles or whatever, you actually don't know the technical term for that. I'd call it a needle, I guess. But you'll have two of these, and when you take them out, usually they won't thread back into the incorrect threads, but the L is always longer. L long. Anyway, one of those tangents and rants I go off into, but that's how these work. If you have bad diaphragms, gaskets, needles, something like that, you're going to have a way harder time. Adjusting the carb is going to be way harder. And, if you're really good at this, the guys that are watching this, if you are watching this and you do this a lot, you know that you can adjust out some pretty wild shit. Like, you can pretty much adjust out an air leak if you're good enough at it. Not smart to do that, though. So if you do these adjustments, it's always a good thing to turn them back in and count where you're at, because you can always put it back. I turn them in and count 1, and a quarter. If you turn it in and you're at like a quarter on this, or 3 or 4, you got something else going on. And sometimes it's really not a good idea to run your saw like that. You could have a list of issues, but that's how I adjust a carb. That's the basics of it. This is a real basic rundown. Maybe if people are interested, I can go way further into this. I'm not one of these guys that has all the technical terms and all that, but I've done enough of it and I understand how these carbs work to where I maybe offer some advice, but I'm really not that guy. I'm not the guy to do that. But I do know somebody that really probably could. I don't know if he's got a YouTube channel, but maybe I could do like a guest appearance. Here's another thing. I get asked a lot to do a podcast. Let me know about that. If you're still watching, maybe you're one of the people that would actually listen to that. But I have been told or asked that so many times, it's insane. I don't know why. I wouldn't think I'd be like the worst guy for a podcast, but let me know if that's something that maybe you guys would be interested in. If I get enough people that are interested, shit, I'll try it out. It'd be cool to talk to different people about different things, but technology is not my strong suit, so it'd be kind of tough for me to set it up. But I swear I've been asked that almost 100 times, from Instagram to YouTube it's crazy. And I've been asked to be a guest on podcasts too quite a few times, so who knows, maybe that's my calling, guys. But either way, hope that helps some people. Let me know if you have any questions. If you have questions, I try to answer the comments or email me, and I'll try to help you out. But again, there's a lot to talk about. That's about as far as I really want to go. Otherwise, it's going to get ridiculous. And we're going to end up about me talking about meeting a horse. All right, see you guys.